House on a hill. When you're a child, you forget things. Everyone does. Though certain things draw me back to my childhood, as they would you. A smell, a food, there's always something. Recently, something happened that made me remember this childhood story. That's also the reason I'm introducing it in this way, and also because I'm not sure how to even start this long story. I get goosebumps even as I write this, finally understanding what it is that exactly happened in my childhood years. I guess I should start in the beginning. When I was around 12, we lived alone on a lonely block of streets out in the nowhere countryside of Indiana. I've always been an only child. My mom and dad never really wanted children, but I always wanted a brother or sibling, so when I asked for a brother or sister, they would always used to say I was the reason why they wouldn't need any more. When I returned the question back with side-eye and a goofy smile, they'd only pat my head and smile. "You're all we'd ever need, kiddo." My father would add. Back then, as a child, I never fully understood what that meant until my parents passed and I grew much older. Being an only child, it was boring to say the least. I had always wished for someone to play with, and I wouldn't gain any friends until a later date. So, to forget the anxiety, I used to draw. As a child, I loved drawing pictures at that age. To cope with the loneliness, it was an escape from life for me. Any type of problem I had could be just as easily forgotten drawing. The drawings could consist of anything, realistic, imaginative. I had photographic memory as a child, which helped me as I drew things from memory quite often. This often impressed many people who my parents would flaunt to. This is where my story comes together. In the middle of mid-July, on an unusually hot summer night, wind was cascading through my open window on the second floor as I drew the streetlight from the street over. I remember groggily, halfway through the drawing, I had gotten distracted. I think it was because my colored pencils were unsharpened from the constant use, which used to bother me a lot as a child with OCD. When I turned back to the window, my childish mind had conjured a thought, something I would regret much further in life than I would have imagined. I was going to sneak out and take a stab at drawing the field behind my house. My parents had only mentioned it once, and how beautiful of a place it'd be to stay at. It was far away, so I'd only saw it once driving down the road. At the time, this excited my child mind. The thought of breaking my parents' rules and going on an exciting adventure far away, no one would know about, sent a shiver of adrenaline through my body, making me forget the sleepiness from the day's activities. I still remember what my parents told me when I asked them about the house on the hill. Their faces got deadly serious, and my father kneeled down just to make it known how serious he was being. Never, never go to the house on the hill. For some reason, I always remembered that, and at the time I agreed and said I would never go to the house on the hill. Without reason or asking anything, I just agreed, trusting their word. I knew eventually I would get scared, so as to not regret the decision, I hurried. I grabbed my small bag and placed my colored pencils inside of it. Having been granted the pencils for Christmas from my grandma, they were next to one of my most prized possessions. This was when colored pencils were just starting to gain in popularity with kids, and the large sets of them would be otherworldly expensive to buy. Next, the small notebook of which I used to draw, one from my days at school I hadn't used. And with that, it was easy to sneak out, opening a small window downstairs. A whistle came from the wind outside the window before raising it back up. The adventure was starting, and the air was chillier than I imagined. I only remember this because I had regretted not bringing my jacket. The cold brought shivers to my skin as I continued through the backyard. There was no fence or property line, as the next house was at least a few miles down the street. As I passed through the tall grass, the wet leaves left droplets of rain from the previous night on my calf. The night was loud, crickets constantly chirping, and the sound of tree branches rustling consoled me. My biggest fear was running into a wildlife of some sort, skunk, possum, and catching rabies. So as I walked towards my destination, I was constantly glancing around, but after a couple minutes of walking and seeing no signs of wildlife, my shoulders shrugged down, and I walked haphazardly, not caring how loud I was. My footsteps were encompassed by the sounds of crickets chirping and the droplets of water falling from the trees all around. It made the journey soothing in a way. As I was walking, I realized something I had forgotten. I stopped moving and pulled the bag over my shoulder, glancing inside of it for a flashlight to no success. That's when I heard it, like a rustling of some sort from way behind, though it quickly stopped once I stopped moving. My mind instantly wandered, and I stood in the thick of the trees like a deer in headlights. I held my breath, though, and as I did, the rustling stopped. I sighed in relief, my eyes awaiting anything moving from behind. They were practically peeled, and I could feel the singes of pain around my orbitals. I waited another minute just to be sure, but even as my legs were shaking like a leaf, I argued within my own mind of heading home. It was already enough of an adventure. I remembered the photo idea and how proud my parents would be of the drawing. With the thought of making my parents happy with the drawing, I continued. After 15 minutes of walking, I'd finally found the last set of trees, and pushing through them, I came into a large field of corn. Being 12 at the time certainly did not help. The corn seemed impossibly high to see over, but I pushed on, trusting that this was the coolest thing ever to draw, only ever being guided by the moonlight when the clouds didn't encase the entire thing. As I gazed up to gather the light to see forward, I saw an unfamiliar house on the hill almost 200 feet ahead. It was placed atop a very large hill, almost overlooking the entire property. It looked almost abandoned. The reason I say almost is because there was something newly placed under a tarp in the driveway. The reason I say new is because it didn't have a single puddle indented into it from the previous night's rain. As I walked through the fields, I thought of that and listened to the corn being straddled down by my unworn hands. I was moving quickly and loud. As I pushed the corn back, something appeared in the front of my vision. I could feel the flight activating, and my legs began to shake once more. Slowly, I crept forward, my eyes watering and hands shaky. It was a man standing in the cornfields. His back was towards me, facing the house on the hill. My legs began to buckle in fear. And truthfully, now that I'm much more grown now, I realize how childish and stupid that was of me. It seemed like forever I waited for the man to move, holding my breath, but after he didn't move, I approached closer, finally realizing that it wasn't in fact a man, but something else entirely. As I touched the fabric of its shirt, it wasn't a man. It was a scarecrow with a hat, and the shadow was only from the moonlight above. I almost laughed out loud at how dumb it was. But as I stood there in the moonlight, I realized how beautiful it looked. The tattered clothing of the worn-down scarecrow drew my attention eagerly, and the moonlight cast down from directly above almost lent a light that was perfectly made for this moment entirely. Underneath the scarecrow there was a patch of dirt, so I took that as my seat and began to unpack my things. After doing that, I sat back upright with a black pencil and began drawing the outlines of the scarecrow and the moon behind it. It was a very ambitious drawing, with the moon in the corner of the page, almost as if it was the sun and a million other childish drawings of mine. I scribbled the outlines down after a couple of minutes of hard work. I placed the pencil down, touching it with my left hand gingerly, not realizing quite how much strain I was putting on it. I thought a few minutes of resting my hand would be acceptable at the very least. I mean, I was in no hurry to get home. So I rested my head on the nearly flat backpack and turned on my side, still rubbing the hand numbly in a trance almost. And then I was asleep. I don't quite remember how long I was asleep for. I only know it had to be hours I was gone. Something felt off when I awoke, as the crickets were no longer chirping, and the wind was no longer blowing in the fields. There was nothing, complete and utter silence beside the slow breathing of my barely awake self. I opened my eyes, glancing at my hand, noticing how dirty my fingernails were now. I was flat on my stomach, my bag a couple feet away from me, as I maybe had kicked it away awkwardly in my sleep, which I was no stranger to doing. The notebook was next to it, closed and shut with not a speck of dirt on it. My eyes were still crusted shut from the sleep, and as I rubbed my eyes and stretched, giving my eyes time to adjust to the much more dark fields now. Without the moonlight to guide, it was almost like a maze of darkness surrounding all around. I couldn't even see my own hand in front of me unless I shook it quickly. My eyes naturally danced up. There was nothing in the sky tonight. No stars, no airplanes, nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the rustling of me sitting up. As my eyes danced their way downwards, I felt like something was off, and my mind couldn't tell me what it was. That's when I realized. Wasn't there a scarecrow up there? My entire body went numb. I still remember the sensation, as that's the only time I've ever felt true terror like that. My eyes suddenly adjusted to the dark, and my hearing was fine-tuned to any sound at all. I could feel the adrenaline starting to course through my body, making my hands shake without end, as if my entire body was freezing. I scrambled for my bag, pushing the notebook into it quickly. My fingers danced along the dirt for the colored pencils, but they were nowhere to be found. I looked closer at the ground, pushing corners of the corn away on the ground, hoping I'd kicked it away accidentally. Still no luck. Just when I had decided maybe I'd accidentally placed them back into the bag, that's when I noticed it. I'd smelt death before. A month before this, I'd found a dead mouse in our basement, which stunk incredibly bad, as it had been rotting for months. This smelt almost exactly like that, the smell of death and decay and pure stink. It made me want to instantly throw up. It had a ripeness to it, sweet almost. It was unfamiliar and uninviting. But all I knew was I had to get away, but my body felt numb, stuck to the floor in an idle trance of fear. There was a hotness to my neck, and I imagined the scarecrow was there, his breath from eating hundreds of other children now on my neck, just inches away from pulling me into the corn to be another victim. That's when I heard the first sound since my own, a quiet rustling sound right behind me. It was quick, but sounded as if it was trying to be quiet. I didn't even bother to look behind me, the flight or flight activating rapidly. I grabbed my bag and darted off in the closest direction, just hoping it was the way home, forgetting about the colored pencils entirely. I swear, and I still swear today. When I glanced back, for a split second, I thought I saw a tattered figure standing behind a tree, watching silently. It felt as if I could feel the pure air of hate radiating from there. I knew for sure I was dead from the scarecrow. So when I popped out on the other side of a couple of trees some 5 minutes after, a couple feet down from my house, I almost felt my heart pounding in my throat. I was finally home, safe. As I got closer, I realized the orange light from the now rising sun wasn't the only light. Red and blue flashing lights now were flashing in front of my house, and loud voices were heard on the front porch, almost yelling at each other. Fearing my parents had another fight, I rushed closer, realizing it wasn't my parents fighting. "Ma'am, we already looked everywhere in the area," an officer said calmly to my distraught mother, who cried on my father's shoulder. The officer begins to speak again, but my mother's gasp caught him off guard. He followed her vision to me, and his eyes raised in surprise. My mother, the first one off the porch, ran at me, almost tackling me to the ground. She picked me up and held me tight to her chest. "I won't ever let you run away again," she whispered in my ear. "Run away?" I asked, not knowing the meaning of the word. The cop stepped forward with my dad off the porch. "You ran away, you're grounded, and you can't watch TV for a week. You scared your mother and me to death." My dad practically almost yelled it. I could hear the sadness in his voice, masked by the anger, making tears start to come to my eyes. My mum only hugged me tighter. But I didn't run away. I was drawing in the fields, I murmured to my mother's shoulder. She pulled me back and looked at me funny. I only realized now what it is she felt. "Honey, your coloring pencils are in your room," she says. I didn't understand what she meant. There was no way I had left them here. I had left them in the fields when I ran away. "Nuh-uh, Mom. Look," I said loudly, almost proud to show my mom the drawing. I pulled my bag off my shoulders, placing it on the ground. I could hear the breathing as the adults surrounded me in a circle. I placed the bag on the floor and opened it up. Inside was the notebook and nothing else. No colored pencils like I had hoped. I pulled the notebook open, flipping to the pages near the back where I was drawing the scarecrow. I found the page with a piece of it left around the wedge in the middle. I sighed loudly and showed the adults around. It really was here, I swear. They didn't say anything, only looked at the notebook. When they said nothing, I glanced back down at the notebook, noticing something else left on the page behind it. There was a very detailed drawing with a multitude of colored pencils, one depicting a small boy in black shorts and a blue t-shirt, laying in the middle of a field of corn, sleeping with a large smile. A large scarecrow sat looking down at him. In the corner it said, JC in all red, and all I could think of in that moment was, those aren't my initials.